Mr. Dillingham is from Civil Aviation, General Accounting Office. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman Hamilton, members of the Commission. Thank you for inviting GAO to participate in this very important national forum. As many of you know, GAO is the investigative arm of the United States Congress. Over the years, our reports have been a key source of information about the security of the nation's transportation system. In June of 2000, we reported that the terrorist threat of attacks using aircraft was a persistent and growing concern for the United States. The report also said that the trend in terrorism against U.S. targets was towards large-scale incidents designed for maximum destruction, terror, and media impact. 15 months later, 9/11 happened. Mr. Chairman, I've submitted a formal statement for the record. This morning, I'd like to summarize that statement around two questions. First, how has transportation security changed since 9/11? And second, where do we go from here? Regarding the first question about changes since September 11, overall, I think the nation has come a long way. Before 9/11, security was never treated as a national priority, and it had never gotten the kind of attention or resources that it receives today. We now have a federal agency whose primary mission is ensuring security for all modes of transportation. That agency is the Transportation Security Administration. And TSA is now the largest agency within the new Department of Homeland Security. During the first 18 months of its existence, the primary focus of TSA has been to improve aviation security. I think that TSA's efforts have contributed to significant improvements in aviation security. Before 9/11, the airlines, the airports, and the Federal Aviation Administration were all in charge of some aspect of aviation security. Unfortunately, as is often the case, when everybody's in charge, no one is really in charge, and things can and did fall through the cracks. Prior to 9/11, the very critical task of passenger and baggage screening, what was referred to as the last line of defense, was being handled by persons who were not properly trained, who were not properly supervised, whose salaries were not even competitive with the salaries of the nearby fast food restaurant, and who probably had been on the job less than 6 months. Now, most of the security screeners have been federalized. The question is whether screening is better because the staff are now federal employees. I submit to you that screening is probably better, but not because the workers are federal employees. Screening is better because the workers are more skilled, because they're receiving a decent wage, and because they're getting better training and supervision. However, I want to point out that TSA reports that since it took over screening, they've confiscated literally millions of prohibited items. I know that you've seen in the media early on about knitting needles and scissors and things of that nature. We're not talking about those kinds of things. We're talking about over 1 million knives and box cutters. We're talking about more than 1,000 firearms. Since 9/11, there's a long list of security initiatives that have been undertaken, some of which are classified and some of which are widely publicized, such as all baggage being screened before it goes on the aircraft, the installation of reinforced cockpit doors, and the presence of thousands of federal air marshals. In spite of all that's been accomplished, there are still vulnerabilities and occasional lapses in the aviation security system. The system is far from perfect and 100% secure. I submit to you that the occasional lapse will probably continue to occur. The goal should be perfection, but there should also be a recognition that perfection is not attainable. The question is, are we doing as much as practical to move towards that goal? I think for the most part, the answer is yes. With most of the goals that Congress set for TSA regarding aviation security now behind them, TSA is in the very early stages of working with the other transportation modes to enhance security in those modes. Unlike the direct and pervasive role that it played with regard to aviation, TSA envisions serving more as a transportation system security manager for the other modes. TSA will establish security standards and facilitate coordination and collaboration across the 6 transportation modes. TSA has also provided some relatively small amounts of money to the other modes for security projects. For the most part, state and local authorities and the private sector, in collaboration with a variety of federal agencies such as the Coast Guard, Customs, and federal law enforcement agencies, have been responsible for much of what has been done to improve security in the other modes. These improvements have largely been a few new security initiatives or increased frequency of existing activities. The new initiatives are activities such as conducting vulnerability assessments and establishing first response teams. The increased frequency type activities include things like additional training for emergency preparedness and revising emergency plans and conducting emergency drills. The bottom line is that actions are being taken and some progress is being made towards securing the nation's transportation system, but what could be considered as constituting an effective overall multimodal transportation security environment may very well be years away. Turning to our last question, where do we go from here and how do we get there? The nation faces a very difficult and resource-intensive task to secure the transportation system. I'd like to offer some thoughts and observations of where we need to go to move closer to the goal. First, we must recognize that it is not possible to anticipate and counter every risk. Priorities must be assigned with time and money devoted to those threats and hazards that are best established and are most likely to cause the most harm. In short, we need to plan and act strategically. Second, effective coordination must be established among the many public and private entities responsible for transportation security. And third, terrorists are creative. We need to address a significant proportion of our energies to identifying possible new terrorist risks and threats rather than simply preparing for the last kind of attack that occurred. And in the final analysis, transportation security, which is crucial to our nation, it must be considered in the larger context of other national priorities and weighed and supported accordingly. Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, this is very much a work in progress and much needs to be done, and the GAO stands ready to help. Thank you very much.